Welcome back to the Restoring Christian Culture podcast. I am co-hosting today. My name is Marco, and I am here with Mr. Dan Sevigny. Hello, Dan.
Hello, Marco. It's good to be here again.
Hello to you. Sometimes we condense these episodes, so if you notice that we're wearing some of the same threads, it's not that we're lazy.
Right.
We're just trying to be efficient.
That's right.
Aren't we? Yes.
That's right.
And so we are back again for another exciting episode of the Restoring Christian Culture podcast. And we decided that we wanted to have a discussion about some of the things that really bother us, the things that really irk us as fathers in particular. And we can see very clearly part of the reason why you and I are why we've met and why we know each other is because we have a very similar mindset in that we know that there are some colossal problems in the world today. Mm-hmm. And one of those big problems that we see is the influence of all of the chaos of the culture, of our society, even of the church, and how it is affecting our children.
Right.
Or at least how it has the potential to affect our children. And so rather than just sit around and do nothing about it, we decide that we want to fight back. And some of us fight back in different ways. And you decided to go ahead and go 100% all in on the thing and build an entire, farm, so to speak, out here to fight it. But you've got your nonprofit, Restoring Christian Culture. You've got your retreat center. We do conferences. We've got a school. So you could definitely say that Dan is all in this battle. That's for certain. I'm playing a tiny little role in trying to support him here and coming out here to these events and listening to the great speakers and participating when and where I can, and podcasting with you is a lot of fun. This is our little corner of the world where we are trying to do what we can to spread the message.
That's right.
We want to spread the message, and we're hoping that others will get on board. Right? Whenever you have these events here, the goal is to get the men out here. Let's be honest, the majority of what you do is more men focused because that's the area that needs the most work.
Well, if we know this, we know that if the men will step up to our roles, then the family unit gets a lot better. And
it does.
And I think that's what we're going to talk about today.
Very much.
As dads, how do we raise good Catholic kids? Today, that is really challenged.
It is really challenged.
Far more than even when it was challenged for our folks that were doing it with us.
Oh, absolutely. Exactly. We've got a whole entire different battle here. It's a different world.
It is.
Let's start with the sign of the cross.
All right. In the name of the Father, the Son, and of the Holy Ghost.
Amen. So how do we restore Christian culture that affects our children, Dan? We want to live by, first and foremost, we want to live by example. Mm-hmm. We don't want to just preach. We need to show our families that we mean this stuff. We already know there's been enough time that has gone by and examples to see that if you just try to do what I say and not actually live that type of thing and not what I do, it just doesn't work. Nowadays, the kids are too smart. They pick up on it. They're like, you're full of it. You know what I mean? Come on. And if you're not going to actually live this, then there's really no need for me to follow.
That's right.
Because you obviously are. It's not obviously not that important if you're not willing to actually do something about it. More than just talk. We all know talk is cheap, right? And so we are living in a time where, like I just mentioned, it's a different world. I think about it often, how different things are from when I was a kid, 80s, 90s. I noticed a big, giant shift around 2010-ish. That was where I really started seeing things start going downhill pretty quickly. Prior to that, I felt like as a culture, we all agreed as a whole on a lot of things. I remember in 2001 when the Twin Towers were attacked. Do you remember how everybody had the American flag proudly displayed everywhere? We were all united in that type of a thing, right? There was this patriotism because we had gotten attacked and we hadn't seen anything really like that in a very long time. And I don't think there'd really been anything ever like that here in the United States. And so I remember just even as a kid, I was like 18, 19 years old at that time. But I enjoyed seeing how we all kind of came together in our agreement that we love being American. Now you fast forward, and yes, this is not a religious thing, but we can see how divided we are on just something as simple as, do we even love our country anymore, right? Because it does affect a lot of facets of our life. Now, apply that to something so much more important and so much more profound as our church,
right,
and as our faith, right? And so we can see that things are getting a little bit weak in a lot of different categories, or a lot of bit weak. What are your thoughts? What do you think is top of the list right now, Dan, as far as the main things that we are battling as men and as fathers to protect our children?
Well, before I even say, hey, let's jump into a specific, I think the biggest thing that we're all up against is the habits. The habits we either do have or the habits we don't have. As you were talking, reflecting back all those years ago to the 80s, some people are listening, laughing at us right now. All of a sudden I was into black and white television, Leave It to Beaver, things of that nature. But there used to be a culture, a habit, to greater or less extent than at other times. But there were habits and cultures that supported this idea that family was important, that supported this idea that faith was important. That we used to have a culture that centered around our life of being a Christian. And then we look at the habits, how do we get more liturgical in our life and things? Because what we can start to do is we can go down the road and talk about the challenges. So, we mentioned a few before we came on, whether it be social media, whether it be the craziness that's going on in the schools, all of these other things, and they're important to talk about, but they're attacking us in a lot of ways because we don't have really good habits. Mm-hmm. Do we have a habit of a family that goes to mass together? Do we have a habit of a family that prays? Is faith a huge part of what we do? So, for you and I as dads, if we started to look around and scan the threats, if you would, we got a bunch of kids. Yours are a little bit younger. Mine have made it to that. I only have one that's not, quote, an adult. We're starting to get out. But you look at the threats that are out there. They're just enormous. And it comes down to, did we give them any habits that are going to help them as they move forward? That's what I see.
Okay. So habits, are you able to maybe pull out a few more details as far as what kind of habits? Are we talking about habits as far as getting up in the morning and exercising? Or are we talking about more of, again, things that they see their dad doing? There's a priest that I really like, Father John Ricardo, and he always talked about his dad was like somebody at Chrysler. He came in, I think, right before Lee Iacocca took over, and he was running Chrysler. And so the man's an executive here, right? He's a CEO of a big company, but his faith was number one. He went to daily mass. But one of the things that stood out to me that he shared was that his dad would do things, obviously very intentionally. He wanted to be seen. So he put the kneeler, for example, in a very prominent place in the home where he could be seen praying every single morning, right? And so it was another one of those categories of you could preach it all day long, or you could actually get down on your knees and show the example of how important this stuff in your life, right? And making sure, sometimes we think we have to make a point to say, hey, I can do this, and there are some things that are very much worth doing in secret. Mm-hmm. And doing in private. But I think it's also important that we make it a priority so that our kids can see those habits. So what are some of the other habits that you think, can you go in a little more detail on what does that actually look like?
Well, I think for a lot of us, it's the simple things. Do we pray before meals? Is that a big deal? Is it led by dad? And then is it also shared with the children? It wasn't always that I had to pray. But to your point, I think that we give up our right to our humbleness as fathers for a period of time. Yeah. While we'd prefer to go in the closet and pray, while we'd prefer to just have a very private spiritual life, we are leading a bunch of troops, if you would. Yeah. So they do need to see that a little bit, and not in a way that it's just, oh, look at me and I'm so wonderful. Right. But in a way that they go, oh, I didn't expect to see dad out here praying on the front porch.
Sure.
I didn't expect to see dad doing these things. So I think number one, praying before meals. One of the things that I love is my kids now, they're like, there's a prayer after meals. I didn't even know that. So that's great. Yep. So we've brought that in. I think mass is just so important. And not only just mass, but do the dads make sure that they do whatever it takes to get the family to mass on time?
Sure.
get into the pew. And listen, we understand there's people that are like, I have 12 little rugrats. They're going every direction. This works or doesn't work. But, one of the things I've noticed now that we have a school here too, do dads teach their children how to genuflect properly?
Yeah.
All these little habits, they're the starting points, because then when we start to look at what's the attacks are, we can say, okay, how did we give them something to fall back on in that?
Yeah.
So what are the big things that you've kind of done as a dad make a big difference?
Well, I definitely try to take that advice of what I heard Father John Ricardo say and be a little bit more visible in some of these things. Now, I try to use technology to also be a tool, because I know that my oldest two are 18 and 20. They're still big on their social platforms. Mm-hmm. It's part of their culture. It's part of their generation. And it's important to them. Now, granted, we've given a lot of guidance and a lot of, feedback as far as going down that road, because it's a slippery slope. I think it's okay to have access to it, but you certainly have to be on top of all sorts of things, right? But it is a channel. It's an avenue that's going to be a part of their life in a lot of ways, and until they maybe get to the point where they decide it's just not worth it. And I think they will get to that point eventually. But if I go and I stop by the Blessed Sacrament at a chapel somewhere, whether it's here or anywhere else, I like to take a picture of my time there. And I like to show that as, I use the stories on Facebook and Instagram to show that I'm actually there at the place. Again, it's not something to say, well, look at me. And it's to hopefully make an impression on the people that matter to me, specifically my children. Yeah. I also have a few friends that I would like to pull in a little closer. And I want them to see that this is something that I'm not ashamed of. Right. This is not something that I'm afraid of. I will share that with everybody who's on my connection list, whether they're Catholic or not. I don't care. Right. I want them to know this is who I am and this is what I'm about. And maybe there's a chance that they may say, hey, where is that? I see that picture. What is that all about? And what is that little round circle thing up there at the front? Right. Hey, you never know. It has absolutely started some conversations for me. But more than anything else, I do that more so that my children will see it. Yeah. And if they're already on that channel and they're like, hey, we're here more so because we want to connect with our friends and all that, but they see that their daddy is popping in at these places and spending time with God in the Eucharist, they can't say that they didn't see that was important to me. Right? That's right. That's just one small little nuance there that I try to keep in mind. There are obviously a lot of things, but I think the bigger ones are making Mass the priority. I have a lot of friends that don't make Mass the priority. Right. So they're kind of loosey-goosey about going and not going. I've found that those things, Dan, are a very, very, very slippery slope. You miss a few Masses, you go out of town and you don't prioritize that, or you at least don't explain that. I've learned from Dr. Kwasniewski that there are some, believe it or not, some exceptions to it. But I think that has to be prefaced with the fact that your kids, your family knows that this is typically never really something that you can miss out on. They have to already be fully understanding like this is a non-negotiable, except for the fact that, there are some circumstances where you can miss Mass. I learned that there were some reasons that I'd never really imagined would be. Right. But again, that presupposes that you understand how important Mass is to begin with. Right. You can't just show up and already be loosey-goosey and then say, we're not talking about, well, there was a football game that day that I really wanted. We're not talking about that.
Well, I think that actually jumps into something that I would go back to even on the habit side. And again, I would preface all that we're going to say right now. This is just a couple of dudes smoking a cigar, incense to heaven, just talking about this that have a bunch of kids. But one of the things that I think is very, very dangerous, even for the devout Mass goer, is changing up the Mass. We're going to go here today. We're going to go there tomorrow. We're going to go at this time. We're going to go on Saturday evening. We're going to go at Sunday. And I've talked to so many guys that, because their life was controlling the calendar of when they went to worship God, it did not become something that was a habit, something that was in the schedule. Right. And so I see that an awful lot. So I couldn't more highly encourage people, find the Mass that you're going to go to. If it's to get to the Mass that's important, if you got to drive a long way, drive a long way. If you got to get to a community, that there's the community afterwards for your children, because we're going to talk a little bit about that too. How do we get some Catholic peer pressure? But all of those things are important, but go to the same mass. I can't tell you how profoundly I think that had an impact on our children. I will give one little story. As we were building out the retreat center, we would start to have retreats in here every single weekend. My wife and I were doing, my wife was really doing most of it. I was helping her. And on Sundays, it would just be the two of us. And so what started to happen as our children had all gotten into driving age and they were able to go to different churches, our family, for a period of time, we'd be still serving people at the ranch. Some of the kids would want to go to mass early in the morning. Then we'd have to go to a later mass. And some kids would be like, hey, we're going to go to the Sunday evening mass. And all of a sudden, our family, while everyone was attending mass, was just kind of catching it here and there. And it wasn't that our family went to worship together on a Sunday. It was just haphazard. So
sure.
I think that that's a big decision for families to make.
I get
that mass schedule and get it locked in.
Yeah, I don't know. And there's something really, maybe this is just a personal feeling for me, but there's something about that Sunday evening mass that really just feels like you put it at the very end, at the lowest place in your priority list. We'll just go ahead and squeeze this in at the last minute. And, I guess we'll go ahead and go, but boy, this is all this other stuff we're doing more important. Right. It just kind of feels that way. I'm not saying that everybody that goes to that's the case, because some people do have legitimate reasons for needing to kind of go at a certain time in a certain place, but it just doesn't have that same feel as a Sunday morning.
Right.
That's for certain. There's no question about that. And so you kind of wonder, again, if you're missing some, you're sending a message to the kids that this really is not the high priority for you. And then even to your point, some of that other stuff can still create some confusion as far as, is this really the top priority for our family or is it not?
Right.
That kind of thing. So now we're dealing with huge problems right now in the church. And I think we do need to touch on the fact that, one of the things that bothers me is that I feel like our church itself has dropped the ball in a lot of ways. I myself personally am bothered by a lot of the things that we see. This is what typically leads a man to exploring more of the traditional side of things, because we've got this synod on synodality, synods, stuff that's going on here. And you just keep seeing a lot of, the church is very much divided, but it kind of, in a way, seems like it has to be right now, because the stuff that's taking place on one side of it just feels very progressive, and it reminds me of that hippie stuff that I saw again, like back years and years and years ago in the 80s. Remember that lifetime? Right. And so, and it just doesn't feel like it's doing anything to protect or to help my kids. And I had mentioned on a previous episode that, some of the stuff that you feel when you come to the more traditional masses, it's like you can just really feel that this is a really hard punch to the face against evil. It just, you just pick up on that, right? In that extra reverence. And I don't think again, our last episode about the TLM we've got some good feedback. We've got some good viewership on it. It wasn't intended to say that going to that mass is some sort of a cure-all for all problems in the world. I do think it makes a significant impact on that, but there's no just one thing, right? But it is a big part of it is that trying to help restore Christian culture and using that tool and that resource that we have, the TLM, to really fight back against it. It's powerful, but there's still a whole lot of other things that we have to do. And a whole lot of other things that we have to keep in mind. Now, you're a friend of mine. We talk a lot off podcast.
Right.
I know where your thoughts are, and I know you're very passionate about the problems in the church today. And some of these priests are absolutely amazing. Mm-hmm. There's less and less bishops that I can say that about. There's less and less cardinals that I can say that about. And so we're seeing huge problems, I think, in the hierarchy that are really just letting us down, because I want support.
Right.
I want these guys to have my back, so to speak. Well, and I don't feel like I'm getting that.
Well, and especially as we're talking about raising good Catholic kids, if you do all the right things to get the habits right, and then you're heading off to mass and you're doing those things, but you find yourself in a liturgy that is destroying the actual foundation of the faith, then you have a moral obligation as a dad to get out. I'll be honest. I look back at some of the things that I accepted for far too long. They were harmful to my family. So we've got to get away from that. We also have to find, if the liturgy you're going to, whether it just be the community, but, they don't dress appropriately. They're not acting appropriate. It doesn't seem like anyone knows Jesus. These are all good reasons to say, hey, wait, for me and my family, we have to do something that's different. And if you have some of the stuff that you just talked about, the craziness going on in the church, and they're promoting, whether it be the homosexuality, they're promoting the inclusiveness, the synodality, everything but the deposit of the faith, then what you have to do is you have to move on. You'd be better off to take your kids, pray a rosary before the Blessed Sacrament, than go indoctrinate them in a place that is going to destroy their faith. Yeah. And what we should be able to see as parents right now is we should be able to see the results. We know that if we don't get our kids in a peer group of other strong Catholics, that they're probably going to struggle to hold on to their faith.
Sure.
We know if we let them go out to the pariahs, whether it be in the public schools and other things like that, to their social settings, if we don't give them that foundation, or worse yet, we let them be attacked in what we thought was the secure place, it's going to be devastating to their future. And it's devastating to our responsibilities as dads to get them to heaven.
Sure. It's almost like the church had decided at some point in time that the deposit of the faith was like, we've talked enough about that.
Right.
It's kind of boring. It's kind of old. I think it's time for us to move on and start talking about some cooler stuff.
Right.
And it just seems like that's where we are in the church, as they've entered into more of these progressive things, because this is we're keeping up with the times. And of course, as Catholics, we're supposed to really be big on, we don't want to keep up with the times. That's the whole point of being Catholic. Mm-hmm. The church is not trying to keep up with the world. It'll keep up with the world in the sense that, it's got a website, it uses technology, it's got a social media page, sure, fine. But not with all the trends that are happening as far as the sins, that are sins that are popular for that time period. We need the voice of truth to stand firm. And again, part of this, I think I've really learned talking to more of the traditional guys, is that they are really caught up more so in the fact that even if there's small changes, really makes a big difference. Mm-hmm. There's no room for really even minor tweaks in those categories, because that's just how important that stuff is.
Well, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier before we got on today, but the more that you start to learn about your faith, because I think we would both say that we have a deficit in our original foundation and our formation, our catechesis, if you would. But the more that you start to get back into your faith, then you start to peel back the onion. Right. And you go, wait, okay, that's not right. Hang on. This is truth. This is truth. We're coming up on a Holy Week, or we might be beyond it by the time this one comes out. But, we're reflecting on Pilate. What is truth? We must be after the truth. And our children need to see the truth. They want to see the truth. Right. And we have an obligation to give them that truth.
That's right.
So we have to protect that like everything matters, because everything matters.
Sure. Absolutely. We're getting sort of close to wrapping up here. We've got about 5, 6, 7 minutes left in this episode. What else do you think we should cover on this subject matter of trying to raise little holy saints? I'll just throw something out there.
Sure.
What about vocations? We are in a vocations crisis. I don't think we can talk about this enough.
No, I don't think so either. We recently had the men's retreat over here at Sanctus Ranch, and Father Purdy was in, and he was talking about, do you have a family culture that is going to cultivate a vocation? And that's a hard-hitting point. Whether you got kids at home or they've already grown and they're gone, but what is our family culture cultivating? Are we saying our first opportunity to see if God wants the totality of our life?
Sure.
And then we can look at other things.
Sure.
But I think that comes back down to what we were talking about earlier, which was the fact that we've got to have that great influence of peer pressure of other Catholics.
Yeah.
So it's not enough to go to Mass. You have to find a Catholic community. If you look at everything, whether it be the COVID crisis or all this other stuff, everyone's trying to isolate each other. They're trying to get social media. The problem for children is they get isolated in their room and they're just reading that and blah, 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 and getting indoctrinated.
Yep.
No, what we need is a culture that's Catholic. So I want you to think about it right now. How many of your friends are devoutly Catholic? How many of the kids that your kids are hanging out with are probably drawing them deeper into the faith? Or are your kids the only ones that are kind of practicing it?
Yeah.
These are questions that parents really have to address. And if you don't have enough of a social group that is strong and devoutly Catholic, guess what? They're going to find another social group 100%. And they're going to become more like them.
Very much. Well, my mind is blown sometimes when I see people that I know from church. You know, more so my parish that Novus Ordo parish that I was at. Which is that the parents are really fired up. They come to Mass. I see them all the time. They practically live there. Then I'll find out that they have kids. I didn't even know they had kids.
Right.
And I mean, I'm talking like not that young. We're talking teenagers. I get the adult kids thing. Okay, maybe they moved away and what have you. But it's like they never come.
Right.
And so there's a disconnect there. Now, again, obviously there's things that are going on in people's lives, and some things are out of some people's control, which has caused havoc and chaos in their life that they weren't on board with. And that had a unfortunate effect on their kids, right? And whether it was a divorce that they were not in favor of, or an abusive spouse or what have you. Those things do affect the kids. And sometimes it causes them to stay away. Sometimes they have a bad experience at church with a priest or with a religious or with even other people at the church, and it scares them away. Some of those are ridiculous as far as their excuses, and others are real and bona fide. And so obviously these are case-by-case things, but I think overall we can agree, Dan, that there's a disconnect sometimes with the parents. Maybe they don't find their faith until a little bit later in life. And so the kids are like, dude, I knew you as a horrible person for most of my existence. And then all of a sudden you had this conversion and now you want us to be on board. Well, I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
And that does happen sometimes, right? But then there's others that seem to have been Catholic their whole life, and they're just like, the kids are not influenced at all by the parents. And again, I have a lot of empathy for it because I know it's a slippery slope in so many different ways. There are so many ways that even the minor little things that you can do can cause the kids to go astray. But that's why we must be so vigilant. Mm-hmm. You know, Father Richard came here one time and gave an amazing retreat, and there was this constant emphasis on the lion, right? And so we see he portrayed the lion as something that was powerful and beautiful that was in our corner. I mostly know the lion as something that prowls to try to destroy me,
right,
and to just try to destroy my family. I think he can go in either direction, right? And so I try to keep that vision of that prowling lion that wants to take your soul, and especially would love to take your wife's soul and would love to take your children's soul, so they can stop this nonsense of each generation being fired up about their faith.
Right.
If we can just cut that off, we'll be great. So I think that these are all things that it requires a whole ton of work. We can't be lazy as men and fathers. We've got to be on fire for these things. We've got to put in the work if we want any chance at all of our kids to take their faith seriously. And even more so if we want to have a vocation in our families, which the world and the church desperately needs right now.
That's right. Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. We have to take that role. We've got to be strong about that role. And I would also say this. I think one of the things I've seen with so many of my friends is they've wimped out when there was an opportunity to tell the kids, we're going to live this way. I have 6 children, and there are certain non-negotiables if you're going to live under my roof. There are certain non-negotiables if you're going to eat. So I don't believe that kids get to dictate to their parents, I think we should crush their little souls and take them to church.
Their little pagan souls.
That's right.
Yep.
But we have to understand that starts at a very young age. And if we've missed out on some of that young age, well, yeah, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, but it's not okay. One of the things that I will tell you too is we're just soft. We're all soft. When I hear, oh, dad didn't come to church today because he has the sniffles. Suck it up, dude. Get your butt to mass. Stand outside, blowing your nose if that's what you got to do. But get out there and get there, because if you don't, your kids are going to go, oh, I don't feel good. Right. I don't want to go to mass. Right. Imagine missing mass because your party went too late on Saturday night. You know, I know a lot of this has become about mass, but without the mass, we're never going to raise good Catholic children.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm far more bothered by dad missing mass because there's a sports game than I am about, maybe a potential illness or something like that. I get what you're saying. I just see it far more common where sports is the priority. Oh yeah. And those kind of things and it's not just mass. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of other things that dad won't go to, that are religious wise, that are important, that make a difference, because there's this obsession. There's a competing religion in that home.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's the religion of sports. Sometimes it's a religion of making money. Sometimes it's, there's all kinds of other little categories there, right? But the point is, we have to show them that priority of what's most important, what matters. Otherwise, let's just be honest, we really don't stand a chance.
No, whatever excuse we used, they're going to find 20 more that relate to that excuse.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Dan, you got anything that you want to finalize for? This was a good episode. We touched on some important things.
Yeah, no, I think it's good for us to have these conversations. So if you're listening to this episode and you're a mom or you're a dad, get around other moms and dads that are in the fight. Talk about these things. Be vigilant to it so that we can make sure, even if there's like a little crack in the armor or something we're just messing up on, our kids are far too important to waste this time. Yeah. So I think for all of us, we can all get better. We want to keep striving for that, and to raise a truly devoutly Catholic child in today's world, you have to understand you are at war from the moment they come out of the womb.
Exactly. No question about that point. If you're watching, if you're listening, make sure you give us a follow, please, subscribe and press like. Give us some feedback too, comment.
Amen.
If you think that we are crazy and you disagree, we still, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, we still want your comment.
Absolutely.
Right? Drop it in there, and maybe that's going to be something that we talk more about on a future episode. You never know, right?
Absolutely.
But we do appreciate those that are following us. We do appreciate your support. Like I said, our last episode about the TLM crossed the 500 view threshold, which is a big deal for us. And so we're hoping that more of these episodes will get out to the right ears and eyes and have an influence. And if you have any interest in what we're doing here, make sure you check out our website, thercci.org, for more information on what we're doing here and what you can do to also grow in your faith, especially and most importantly, if you are a man, husband, and father.
Amen.
God bless. That does it for today's episode. We will catch you on the next one.